A trapped deer can kick hard enough to injure itself or the person approaching it. Then, while the wire is still tight, it suddenly goes completely still. That looks like trust. It can also mean the exact opposite. In captured roe deer, visible resistance did not reliably reveal how stressed the animals were inside. So when a wild animal appears to let a human help, 5 different systems can produce the same frozen moment. Only one comes close to asking for help. The other 4 are why stillness must never be treated as permission. The video clip gives us posture, movement, breathing, sound, and a few seconds of context. It does not give us the animal's explanation. Stillness can be a defensive freeze. It can be a last-ditch immobility response after contact. It can be exhausted energy conservation. It can be a dangerous physiological crash. It can reflect learned tolerance around humans. And in a narrower set of cases, the animal may direct information toward a person. These routes can look nearly identical in a vertical rescue clip. Their meanings are not identical at all. From the animal side, the scene begins with 2 problems, not 1. There is the net, fence, mud, room, or object preventing escape. Then a large, unfamiliar primate walks directly toward it. Human intention is invisible. Distance, speed, gaze, noise, posture, and blocked escape are immediately available. For many wild animals, close human presence is itself a major stressor. In the roe deer study, longer human presence beside the trap was associated with a stronger short-term stress signal. That is why professional guidance repeatedly says to reduce people, noise, handling, and time. The rescuer can be solving the physical problem while intensifying the animal's perceived threat. Both things can be true at once. Fight and flight are memorable because they move. Freeze is easier to mistake for cooperation. When escape is uncertain, reducing motion can delay detection, interrupt pursuit, or buy time for new information. The body is not necessarily relaxed. Attention may be narrowed onto the threat, while muscles remain prepared for a sudden burst. The critical detail is that freezing is an action inside a defensive system. It does not require the animal to classify the human as kind. It only requires movement to become the worst option for that moment. If the animal explodes into motion when the restraint loosens, the apparent calm was never a social contract. It was a temporary strategy. After pursuit, capture, or physical restraint, some animals enter a more extreme immobile state. Researchers use terms such as tonic immobility or thanatosis in specific experimental and anti-predator contexts. The popular phrase "playing dead" covers several different patterns and should not be pasted onto every rescue. Across species, the trigger, duration, and usefulness of immobility vary. Even within one frog species, different populations did not respond identically in a standardized test. That variation is the point. A motionless bird, frog, deer, or fox should not be diagnosed from its resemblance to another species online. The safe conclusion is smaller. Contact and inescapability can produce stillness without producing trust. Struggling is expensive. It consumes oxygen, produces heat, drives muscle work, and can tighten whatever is trapping the animal. Pain can also make one direction of movement impossible. Stopping may conserve the final usable energy for the instant an exit opens. That creates a deceptive sequence. The person approaches, the animal fights, the person begins cutting, and the animal stops. The timing invites a story about recognition. But the same timing appears if fatigue simply crosses a threshold while the human is working. Visible behavior alone cannot tell those explanations apart. This is also why trained teams plan equipment and restraint before moving close. Shorter, quieter handling is not only gentler, it reduces the cost of the entire event. In susceptible wildlife, intense pursuit, capture, heat, and muscular exertion can contribute to capture myopathy. This is not ordinary nervousness, and it is not something a viewer can diagnose from a screen. It is a potentially severe physiological syndrome requiring professional judgment. The dangerous visual mistake is simple. Less movement looks like improvement. Sometimes, less movement means the animal has fewer options left. Wildlife protocols therefore watch the whole animal, the environment, handling time, temperature, breathing, and species-specific warning signs. They do not score success by how easy the animal becomes to hold. If restraint is creating unacceptable stress or danger, guidance can require changing methods or stopping. Calm-looking footage is not a medical clearance. Not every wild animal meets a human as a completely new category. Urban birds, park mammals, rehabilitated animals, and captive wildlife can accumulate thousands of uneventful encounters. Repeated exposure without a bad outcome can reduce a response through habituation. Food history can pull behavior in the opposite direction and make approach more likely. Neither process is automatically trust. Habituation means a familiar stimulus produces less response. It does not mean the animal understands a rescue plan. Research on looking back toward humans also shows that species history and individual experience interact. An animal with human experience has more learned information available than a truly free-ranging animal encountering restraint for the first time. That history can change the odds without letting us read its mind. To test human-directed communication, researchers need more than an emotional rescue clip. They create a problem the animal cannot solve, control what the human can see, and measure where the animal looks. In one study, captive kangaroos looked toward a human and alternated gaze between the person and an inaccessible food container. That pattern is interesting because gaze alternation can direct another individual's attention toward a problem. But these kangaroos lived in captive settings and were accustomed to people. The study did not show a newly trapped wild kangaroo identifying a stranger as a rescuer. Even in controlled tasks, looking can reflect expectation, frustration, learned reinforcement, or information seeking. The strongest evidence comes from repeated behavior that changes with the human's attention and the structure of the problem. One look back after release cannot carry that weight alone. The internet selects for the encounters that form a clean emotional arc: threat, stillness, release, eye contact, departure. Failed approaches, ambiguous pauses, and animals that flee instantly rarely become the famous version. Editing compresses minutes or hours of changing stress into a sequence that feels like one decision. Then, narration supplies the sentence the animal cannot provide. It knew. It understood. It said thank you. Those interpretations may feel plausible, and individual animals may possess more social understanding than a simple reflex account allows. But the clip does not eliminate freeze, fatigue, physiology, habituation, or coincidence. Emotion is part of why the rescue matters. It is not a substitute for identifying the mechanism. Professional wildlife response does not require proof that the animal understands. It requires a plan that protects the animal and the people nearby. The species, injury, defense weapons, traffic, water, temperature, entanglement, and legal rules all change the response. For the public, the safe first move is usually distance, scene control, and a call to a licensed wildlife rehabilitator or local authority. Large mammals, marine wildlife, raptors, bats, and unfamiliar carnivores are not do-it-yourself rescues. Quiet voices, fewer people, visual barriers, prepared equipment, and minimal handling reduce unnecessary stress when trained responders act. The goal is not to make a wild animal comfortable with humans. Rehabilitation manuals actively warn against taming and overhabituation because release depends on appropriate wild behavior. Helping well can look impersonal. That distance is part of the help. Now we can answer the frozen moment without inventing one universal mind. A terrified wild animal may stop fighting because movement has become strategically useless. It may enter a contact-triggered immobile state. It may conserve energy, cross a fatigue threshold, or suffer a physiological emergency. Previous human experience may reduce its response. And in rare, evidence-demanding cases, it may direct attention toward a person who can change the problem. The posture alone cannot choose among those explanations. Stillness is a state change, not a translation. The animal does not need to understand human kindness for the rescue to be real. And we do not need to romanticize the moment to treat its fear seriously. The most respectful interpretation is the one that keeps uncertainty visible. If you want the evidence hiding underneath strange animal and human behavior, subscribe to Oddly Evident. Next, we move from one animal's survival state to the hardest question in an entire historical population. What was the worst year to be an ordinary person, and how could we compare suffering without turning history into a clickbait scoreboard? For this rescue, remember the boundary. It stopped fighting. We still do not get to decide what it was thinking.